Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's the first of the month, and you know what that means. It's time for a really challenging question. Now, if you saw all the 4-star questions I put out in the last few weeks, you might be wondering what more I could possibly have in the tank. And I'm pleased to present this really excellent question that was submitted by viewer Gonzaron. Amy controls a Thespian stage, which is currently a copy of Urza's Saga. She puts its third chapter ability onto the stack, and then responds to that with using Thespian Stage's ability to turn that card into a copy of a mountain. What happens? Okay, so there is a lot going on in this question, and I absolutely love that. The first thing that I thought when I saw it for the first time was, okay, maybe I should look up the rule that makes you sacrifice a saga when it has too many lore counters on it. And there's a couple of reasons why I wanted to do this. First of all, I knew it was a state-based action, and you can't normally respond to those, so I wanted to see if this play was even legal at all. Sure enough, if you look at the actual wording of the state-based action in the CR, you can see that it's not going to be performed if the last chapter ability is still on the stack. So that's good because that's exactly the case that we have in the original question, which means it definitely is possible to respond to that last chapter ability by activating another ability. The other interesting thing that I want everybody to notice in this state-based action is that you only sacrifice sagas this way. That's also really important because if you change the Thespian stage into a copy of something that isn't a saga, then that means that you won't have to sacrifice it, which is good because even if you become a copy of something else, you're still going to have all those lore counters on you. So it's good to know that if you are not a saga, you will not have to be sacrificed for having too many lore counters. Alright, so with that being the case, let's take a look at exactly what's going to happen when we have this sequence of events. We're going to put the triggered ability from the chapter 3 on the stack, then Amy's going to activate the ability that makes the Thespian stage copy a mountain, then that ability is going to resolve, and it's going to make Thespian stage look something like this. And after that happens, then the chapter ability is going to resolve. And after that, the game is going to check to see if there's any state-based actions that need to be performed, and there aren't, because at this point the Urza Saga is not an Urza Saga anymore. And so there's no sagas that have too many lore counters on them. Everything works exactly the way that Amy had hoped. Now, there's a couple of loose ends that I wanted to tie up here. First of all, you might have noticed something kind of interesting, which is that even though the Thespian stage is now a mountain, it still has those abilities that Urza's Saga gained during Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. That's not an oversight. That really is how it'll happen. I made a whole video going in depth about this type of interaction about a week ago. However, I'll briefly summarize here. When a triggered ability sets up a continuous effect, the way these chapter abilities do, then all the work is done at the time that triggered ability resolves. So the set of permanents that are going to be affected by that continuous effect is going to get locked in and it's not going to change. And the thing that continuous effect is going to do is likewise going to be locked in at the time of resolution. So that means as soon as the chapter 1 ability resolves, it's going to put a continuous effect onto that Thespian stage that says this permanent now has tap add colorless. Same thing is going to happen when the Chapter 2 ability resolves. And even if the Thespian stage turns into a copy of something else, that does not make it a different permanent. All the continuous effects that were acting on it are still going to be acting on it. And so that means that it still is going to have the abilities to tap for colorless and the ability to make a token. That's really cool, and a lot of extra value for Amy. If she manages to keep this Thespian stage around, she'll be able to make a construct every turn, which could get out of hand pretty fast. Now, there's one other thing that I wanted to touch on. Let's say you're Nick and you have a Stifle. What's the best value you can get by playing the Stifle during this original sequence that was presented in the original question? And so the first thing that a lot of people were probably thinking about would be, well, okay, if I stifle that ability that makes the Thespian stage into a copy of a mountain, then that could be pretty good. Since we're countering that ability, then the Thespian stage will not turn into a mountain, which means it'll stay being a saga and it'll still have 3 lore counters on it, which means that Amy will have to sacrifice it. So that is pretty good, but it turns out we can actually do a little bit better. If we use the Stifle against the Chapter 3 ability, then that would mean that the Chapter 3 ability would get countered. And if an ability gets countered, it's going to be removed from the stack. That means immediately after Stifle resolves, the game is going to check state-based actions and see that there is indeed 3 lore counters on this Urza Saga, and it doesn't have any chapter abilities on the stack at this time. That means Amy will have to sacrifice it at this point. Therefore, Nick will get out of both the ability that lets Amy search for an artifact and be able to get rid of Amy's land, a 2-for-1. Finally, as stated before, the lore counters are going to stay on that Thespian stage even after it turns into a mountain. Now, that's pretty interesting in its own right, but it also means Amy has to be really careful because if this ever becomes a saga, then it probably is going to have too many lore counters on it and it'll get sacrificed immediately the next time state-based actions are performed. She won't even get any extra bonus activations from any of the chapter abilities because the counters are already on the permanent, and they won't see the counters getting put onto the permanent. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? This was a really awesome ruling with a lot of moving parts and a lot of stuff to talk about, so give yourselves a big pat on the back if you managed to get all of the answers right. That's all I have for you today, but join me again tomorrow for another daily ruling. But until then, I hope you have a great day.